So good afternoon everyone. A warm welcome to all gathered here for yet another inspiring session of PMF Extramural Lecture Series at IIT Palakkad. Today we are truly privileged to host a distinguished speaker, Dr. V.S. Sheshani, who will be addressing us on this topic, Challenges and Opportunity for India in the Changing World Economic Order. Dr. Sheshani's remarkable career in diplomacy and his deep expertise in economic and strategic affairs bring a truly novel perspective to today's discussions. His insight will undoubtedly help us better understand how India can position itself in a rapidly evolving world. So without further delay, let's welcome Dr. V.S. Sheshani to take the stage and share his invaluable thoughts with us. So please.
Good afternoon to all of you. Let me first of all thank IIT Palakkad, the Dean, Dr. Tyagarajan, for inviting me to this lecture. And also let me thank the Ministry of External Affairs, which has sponsored this lecture and made it possible. The topic for today is quite a mouthful. It actually has three aspects fused together. The first is challenges and opportunities for India. As we move towards a Viksit Bharat or developed economy. The second, as it says, is about the world economic order. Now we must understand what it means and what are the institutions and principles underlying that, what constitutes the world economic order. And the third aspect is what is the changing world economic order. So here we need to get a grip on all the tectonic changes, I have to say, that we are seeing today on the trade and other economic fronts, and how geopolitics is influencing geoeconomics. We will particularly focus on the role being played by the three trade majors in the world. They are the United States, China, and the European Union. Of course, when they say European Union, it means all the 27 countries which form the European Union. Now, the way they are dealing with the trade and other economic issues over the recent years have changed. So, we have to see how they have changed. And then we have to look at how these changes are posing a challenge to us. So that will be the sum and substance of my lecture as captured in this very first slide. So I will not go more into this. I have already said what I am going to say. Now, going one at a time. So first let us take up what are India's challenges and opportunities. And when we look at that, we have to see what are our strengths, what are our vulnerabilities. If you look at the pluses on the left side, they include the fact that we are the fastest growing economy in the world today for some years now. We grew at 6.5% last year, and the expectation is this year also we will do likewise. We are expected to become the third largest economy by 2028 or soon thereafter. Our foreign exchange reserves are comfortable. They are covering about 11 months of imports. On the trade front, our exports are about $440 billion, our imports about $700 billion. And we have a very robust services growth sector. And the startup scene is also encouraging with about 180 unicorns. And most important, we have still the demographic dividend. What do we mean by demographic dividend? The population of our younger age, between 16 and 59, the working age population, is continuing to rise. This is unlike several other societies, including China, where this is begun to decline. So these are the pluses in our favor. But if you look at the right side, what are the vulnerabilities that we are facing? Because it all depends on your perspective. If you see our GDP, but put our population in the denominator, then the GDP per capita is something like 2,900 or so, which puts us as still a lower middle income country. Whereas if you want to be a Viksit Bharat, developed economy, that will have to be something like $13,000 per person. So we need to cover a lot if we have that ambition. And that will become possible only if we have a sustained annual economic growth rate of 8% plus. I told you, now we are doing about 6.5%. We need to have a sustained growth rate of 8% plus. And in this, our manufacturing has to significantly grow. At the moment, the share of manufacturing in our GDP is only around 12-13% or so. This has to significantly go up beyond 20%. People say it should be 25%. So this is again a huge challenge. And our goods exports, if you see there, are much lower than imports. So we have a big goods trade deficit. And that is something not very healthy. So this is again something that we have to, because export is an indicator of your competitiveness. And this is an area that we need to significantly improve. And we have also become import dependent in a number of areas, including strategic ones like semiconductor chips, in critical minerals, bulk drugs, fertilizers, etc. Now to give you some numbers, China provides about 88% of antibiotic inputs, 75% of lithium batteries, 95% of flat panel displays, 80% of laptops, and so on and so forth. Now, certainly, if we have to be a developed economy, we also have to be more self-reliant economy, and our manufacturing strengths in all these areas have to go significantly. So, we need to fire on all cylinders as a economist from IMF recently said, and this requires a sustained growth rate of 8% plus. Now, coming to the second aspect, world economic order. Normally, when you talk about world economic order, as I said earlier, you talk about the systems and principles underlying money, finance, and trade. And they comprise institutions like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the WTO, the World Trade Organization, which was earlier called GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and the rules relating to them that have evolved over the years. Now, these are institutions which are creations of the victors of the World War II, which were mainly US and the Western Europe. And they have so far ensured certain amount of growth, stability, predictability in trade and other economic aspects. But the West also has retained influence in running these organizations. So the topic for today says changing world economic order. Now, here the prospect for a significant change at present is emanating from the trade front and not so much from the money or finance front. While some earlier crises, it's not that the world hasn't had economic crisis before, it did have. For example, in 1971, the peg of dollar to gold, 35 ounce per dollar, was changed to floating exchange rates. So there was a crisis at that time, but it was managed. Likewise, the world had a financial crisis when some of the US banks went down in 2008. But then they came back with stricter monitoring of all the financial institutions by the Bank of International Settlements, and we have also accepted that just like other countries, those norms. But now, the threat is emanating on the trade front. Now, the threat is also this time emanating, unlike previous times, when it emanated largely from within the Western countries themselves. Now it is emanating from China, principally, which is contesting US supremacy in different economic areas. And contributing to the complexity is also the spillover from geopolitics into geoeconomics, with the lines between them blurred. The Ukraine conflict, the uncertainty about Taiwan, and the growing assertiveness of China in the South China Sea area are all some of the elements. And we have also to understand that this is arising from the relative decline of the West economically compared to the rest of the world. That is also a fact. And lack of unity amongst the Western countries. Differences are cropping up even between US and Europe, and even within the European Union. There are differences with Hungary taking one line, Slovakia taking another, and so on. In this background, we have to see what really formed the existing order on international trade. When I say threat is emanating on the trade front, and there is a threat to the existing order, we must first of all know what is the existing order. And this is what I will take you through the next 2-3 slides on trade issues, which will talk principally about the basic rules governing international trade. You can say, in computer language, these are the operating system for trade. And these are the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, GATT, came into effect 1st January 1948. While the bouquet of trade agreements have grown, there are 3 basic principles for merchandise trade which are still in effect. And to some extent, these principles have got derived from the troubles that the world went through during the 1930s. Because at that time, there were currency wars, there were tariff wars, and resulted in the Great Depression, well known in literature, during the 1930s. And many have said that the Great Depression that took place during the 1930s was even the cause for World War II. So you can understand how these principles have come about after a great deal of skirmishes between Europe, US and that, and other countries. So these are distilled from practical experience as most used now. The first principle is non-discrimination. What does it mean? It means that if India or any GATT member imports from country B, C and D, the import duty that I will charge will be same. I will not discriminate between B, C and D in terms of the import duty that I will impose. It is also called most favored nation principle. I favor every country as the most favored nation. This is a very fundamental principle of international trade. The second principle is national treatment. If a good comes into the country after payment of duties, then I cannot make any distinction between the treatment I give to that good and a very light domestic good. I cannot charge one GST for an imported bag and another GST for the same imported bag produced in national. This is the second important principle. And the third important principle is every country is given a schedule of duties. These are called tax, CVs. These are liberalized through successive rounds, but no country can exceed their tariff CV. So, you cannot impose a tariff which is above that CV in your schedule. Please understand these are very, very important because countries are violating precisely these principles. So, the other aspects that the GATT constituted are also important to understand. Unlike money and finance, IMF and World Bank, where US has a veto over its major decisions, even today. But in GATT and WTO, decisions are taken by consensus, which means everybody has a say. So this is a basic difference, and this again is something that the West is unhappy about. But what do these principles mean in terms of economic theory? When you say I will not discriminate between B, C and D, what I say is I give benefit to comparative advantage. Whichever country produces a good which is most competitive, I will use. Because the duty I charge will be the same, So unless they are competitive, they cannot do that. So this is very, very important. But GATT also prescribed that you can allow such competition to take place only if there is a level playing field. If one country dumps its good into India, for example, artificially by giving subsidies, that's not fair. So there were rules in GATT even in respect of dumping, subsidization, and so on, which are part of the rules. So these form basic operating system of GATT. And then the only one exception to the non-discrimination principle is when countries enter into free trade agreements. These are called FTAs. But there are conditions for FTA. You cannot just, two countries cannot just say, I will have zero tariff for chocolates, and that is free trade agreement. No. You have to have free trade on substantially all trade. So this is the basic condition, that if you get into an agreement which reduces the duty substantially on all trade, then it's an FTA. So these are some of the facts which have formed so far from 1948 to the present for the operating system for GATT. And yet another practice that was observed in GATT was for developing countries. When we talked about negotiating rounds of regional tariff reduction, what will be expected of developing countries will not be exactly same as for developed. There will be less than full reciprocity. Again, therefore, another principle which today is being violated with the reverse, but these are the basic principles. Okay. Now, fast forward to 1995, when the World Trade Organization was formed. This is GATT 2.0. And several more topics were included now under the trade portfolio. Services, trade and services. Like India is a good example of specializing in trade and services, IT services, computer services, professional services, etc. They came into the menu of rules of the WTO, intellectual property rights, and so on. So WTO expanded in terms of the rules that it covered, and more importantly, it also, when GATT was there was an informal procedure for settling disputes, because trade countries can have disputes. Now WTO formalized this procedure by having a two-type system, panel and appellate body. And these bodies will decide on the disputes. And the reports of these bodies will come to the WTO membership. And they have to be adopted by negative consensus. This is a very important part. Because during the GATT days, the members who were part of it said, I don't agree with the report, and they were not adopted. So WTO said, unless all the members decide not to adopt, the panel and appellate body reports are adopted. So this again was a sea change in terms of way disputes were dealt with, more effective. And as a result, you saw that WTO membership rose steadily from 76 in 1995 to 166 now. And there are 22 more countries like waiting in the queue to join the WTO, which indicates that countries appreciate that stability and predictability that the trading system brought into the game, and they were more comfortable with it. And the system of consensus also was something that they appreciated, because they could participate in the decision making unlike the other IMF and World Bank, where it was a question of veto. Now, what I have said so far tells you about the world trading system as we have today. Now, today the European Union, United States and China. Why do I take these three countries, these three entities? Because together they constitute 42% of world exports of imports. And therefore they have heft. And the way they are now conducting themselves are very different and going against some of the principles that I have mentioned so far. So the rest of the lecture will be talking about how US principally, but also China, but also the European Union are taking very different lines as opposed to what I have mentioned, the existing WTO rules on trade. Now, let's look at the US first. And this is the world's largest importer. It imports about 16 to 17% of the world imports. It constitutes. And as a result, it has left. And the US appeared uneasy with the current trading system for several years now. In fact, even during the Trump 1 administration, and I'm talking about the years between 2017 and 2020, when Trump became president the first time, he was uncomfortable with the system and he launched investigations against China's intellectual property practices. And then penal tariffs were introduced. We also saw US taking measures on national security grounds for imposing restrictions on steel and aluminium imports. Why did it do that? Because it found that its manufacturing was steadily getting reduced. And many of its factories in the Pittsburgh and other areas, the Rust Belt as it were slowly losing competitiveness out and had to close down. So it imposed tariffs on national security ground, which is not really permitted by the WTO. But he went ahead and imposed duties in order to enable industries in these sectors to come up once again and to give them protection. And US also started blocking appellate body requirements of the WTO. So it didn't want to be judged by the WTO for all the measures it was taking. Now, President Biden came in 2020. Surprisingly, although a Democrat, he continued many of the US tariffs imposed by Trump. The only difference between Trump and him was that Trump did not really work closely with allies, whereas Biden did. He put together the collaboration between European allies, even Indo-Pacific allies, formed forums like Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, and forged ideas like critical minerals, supply chain resilience, and so on. Now, we are in Trump 2 regime. And now, he is no longer even pretending about WTO rule appearance. Declaring a national economic emergency, this is what he has said. Under the country's International Economic Emergency Powers Act, and arming himself with powers to reset tariffs, he has introduced what are called reciprocal tariffs, based on what trade balance that particular country has with US. So, a simple violation of non-discrimination. regulation itself. So he is dictating what tariff will be for each country. And he is going beyond the boundaries, the tariff ceilings in US schedule. In US schedule of tariffs, the average rate of tariff is 3.4%. But the tariff that he is imposing now far, far above this. And by negotiating, and he is asking countries to come and negotiate with US to be able to reduce the tariffs. And in the process, he is extracting a lot of demands from them in terms of investment they will make, in terms of what they will purchase from the US, etc. So, what we are therefore seeing is that he is leveraging the access to the large US market by pushing countries to accept deals that they would otherwise not have done. And this was precisely what the WTO rules had been formed to prevent. And looking at the trade deals that Trump has so far struck, you can say these concessions that he has asked them to make include reduction in tariff and non-tariff barriers for imports from the US, partner to accept products as per US standards. Like for example, if you own a car, he is saying you accept a car as per US standards. Don't insist that it should be as per your standards. GMO, he is saying accept US standards. Genetically modified products, which several countries have problems with. But he is pushing for export of corn, soya beans, etc., which are GM modified, and so on. It also wanted substantial commitments on purchases from the US of US energy products, US agricultural products, and defense equipment, etc. He is also pushing countries to make investments in the US, including in manufacturing. And lastly, providing access to US companies in their markets for natural resource and other exploitation. The last category, one of our neighbors has gone and signed a deal with them. Any guesses? Pakistan has allowed US to access its critical minerals and other resources to be able to get a lower tariff. So he is using every means to be able to strike deals with countries. In return, what is the US doing? Well, it says a reciprocal tariff of 10% for countries with which US has a trade surplus. This is not permitted by WTO. An even higher tariff of 15% for countries with which US has a trade deficit but has come to a deal. And a reciprocal tariff of 15%, in fact mostly higher than 20%, for countries with which no deal could be arrived. And unfortunately, India presently figures in this category, because we haven't been able to strike a deal with the US yet. It must be added also that these tariffs are in addition to the MFN tariffs of US. So really speaking, they are very, very high. So, what some have joked is that US is no longer a MFN respecting country. It is MFN in a different way, most feared negotiator. Everybody is fearing to negotiate with the US. and in the process it's violating basic WTO principles, and I don't have to tell you that it's violating non-discrimination. It is violating Article 2 of GATT because it's going beyond its tariff and imposing national security grounds, steel and aluminium. These were already found to be illegal by a WTO panel, but notwithstanding that, he has now expanded this to also cover autos, auto parts, copper, pharma, lumber, etc. So the number of items on which he has imposed additional duties on national security grounds has gone far beyond. And what is more, in the process, he is making not only the US to be WTO illegal, but he is also making the other countries who arrive at a deal with the US to be WTO illegal, because they will be discriminating in favor of the US as against others. So this is the situation. There are, of course, two unknowns about whether these tariffs are sustainable. One, there is a challenge in the US courts that these tariffs are illegal as per US national laws. I will come to this in the next slide, why they are disputing this. The other aspect is the impact these tariffs may have on the US economy, stock market indices and other indices. If the economy as a result gets very negatively impacted, then there will be a pressure on the US administration to change these things. These are the two unknowns. It's too early to say what will happen, but we have to wait and see. But the legal challenge against these tariffs, they have reached the Supreme Court of the US. Basically, these are cases mounted by some of the Democrat-ruled states. As you know, Trump is the Republican Party nominated president. Now, there were also some small businesses which took to lose a lot because of these tariffs. They have also mounted cases. Now, lower courts have already turned them illegal. It has gone to the US Supreme Court now. And in about a few days' time, early November, the US Supreme Court is going to hear the cases. We don't know when the judgment will come. But the point that the people who have not these cases are appealing was, it is not within the powers of the US President to impose tariffs. The power rests with the US Congress, not with the executive. So this is a constitutional issue that they are putting up, whereas the President, as I mentioned, is invoking International Economic Emergency Powers Act. So they are saying that that does not allow them to impose a higher tariff, which only the US Congress can. So this, we have to wait and see what happens, whether they will go, but this is an issue. So now, we have seen a bit of the action from the US side. Let me turn to the China challenge. Now, China has emerged as a trade major, and unlike Western economies or other economies, and the manner in which GATT was formed, I talked about level playing field when I talked about that. If you will have level playing field, if you have a market economy. But if you have a state-driven economy, where prices can be controlled, where there are state owned organization which can push pressure, etc., then it's a different matter altogether. And China calls itself a socialist market economy with Chinese capitalists, whatever you may call it. So, and it's quite opaque. It preaches lofty principles like globalization, like multipolar world, adherence to WTO rules, etc. But in actual practice, it does what it wants. And its actions betray a single-minded pursuit of economic dominance, and that it should have primacy. Now, there are several things that I have mentioned here, where, like state-owned enterprises, the WTO required they should be run on commercial lines. But that's not the case always with China, and you don't even have a way to check whether it is the practice because the system is opaque. So, and it also follows, the last one is particularly important. It creates excess capacities in specific areas, captures market share worldwide, if necessary by pushing cheap imports, and makes other countries lose factories, lose competitiveness, lose employment. And this has been a model it has been exposing. This is evident in the steel sector, for example, where China today has a capacity of 1,100 billion tons. This is about 50% of the world capacity. Aluminium and many other areas, and of course critical minerals, it's as far high. So this is a very different model which the originators of GATT did not envisage when they made those principles. But it is exploiting those principles to advantage. So there is a WTO report which came out last year, which has a very clear view on China's subsidies. And these are very clear, it's a very, normally, an international organization is very circumspect when it comments about a member state's governance or rule, etc. But you can see very clearly that here they are quite specific. They say that the notifications given by China to the WTO do not provide information on expenditure level on sectors where government support is likely to have global repercussions, such as aluminium, electric vehicles, solar modules, glass, shipbuilding, semiconductors, or steel. And it also says, the last sentence, on the other hand, information available from commercial databases, not government databases, but commercial databases, indicates large amounts of public service. Very clearly stating that there is a big difference between what we get as notification from Chinese government and what we see as evidence. And therefore, creating a more China-centric order with initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative that better delivers its interests. And what is this Belt and Road Initiative? It is really offering various countries like Sri Lanka, like Bangladesh, various projects with debt that has very high rates of interest. And they send Chinese employees, like Chinese, to set up those projects. They don't even use local labor. So there's a different way by which they operated. Of course, for countries like Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, if they can have a road very quickly in 2 years' time, it pleases the voters. So those politicians go for it. Yet it has long-term implications. So it has created a very different model of governance and international to create a China-centric order and acquire global dominance. And you can see it has also set up a number of institutions like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Of course, we are also members, but China led the process. And expanding use of yuan or swapping facilities, etc. So, I will not dwell too much on this. Basically, I wanted to give an idea about how the Chinese are pushing their approach. Now, coming then to the third actor, the European Union. Now, it is smarter in its own way. They are taking regulatory approach. They have heavy regulations. If you look at the area of data, if you look at carbon border adjustment mechanism that they have introduced. Starting next year, they say that steel produced in India will have to meet the carbon emission standards of the EU. Otherwise, they will charge duties, and quite hefty duties, which will go far beyond its boundaries in the government. So they have initially, to begin with, imposed this on energy-heavy industries, steel, aluminium, fertilizer, and a few others, but they may expand it in the future too. Now, other countries have objected. They have said the Paris Agreement on climate change does not authorize you to impose such duties because each country under the Paris Climate Agreement has different commitments. A developing country like India has said that we will become net zero in 2070, whereas Europe and other countries will do it by 2050. So when our commitments as per the climate agreement are different, how can you say that the emissions should be the same when the steel enters into Europe? So there are issues there that EU is coming up with, and they are using the regulatory route to seek protection. And simultaneously, they are also giving a lot of subsidies now, a number of programs, critical minerals, etc. So, increasingly, economic security is getting embedded in its process. And the new Commissioner for Trade of EU is not only the Trade Commissioner, but Commissioner for Trade and Economic Security. So, this is a new aspect that is entering into the trade lingo, economic security. So countries feel that on grounds of national security, Trump, I told you already, Europe is also using that argument to impose restrictions on trade. And they are going about seeking de-risking from Russia and the EU. Now, already party to the largest number of FTAs, EU, they are in fact going in for more FTAs, including negotiating a deal with India, which we hope will be signed soon. Now, EU has thought US was its ally, and it did not expect the kind of treatment that it has got from Trump. But because of the problems that they are having with Ukraine, and they need US support at this point in time to be able to deal with Russia, they thought they have to come to an agreement with Trump. And therefore they have signed a deal by which Europe will make a lot of investments in US, purchase from the US as demanded by Trump. And they have got their duties reduced to 15%. So they have also arrived at the deal, although they are not ally. So you can see how things have changed over the last 2 years in terms of even relationship between US and its allies. Now, I have not dealt with the trade policies of other countries like Korea, Japan, etc. For the simple reason that these are countries which have trade shares, about 5%, 6% or so. And they are more what we in trade lingo call rule takers rather than rule makers. As I told you earlier, US, EU and China today each have exports and imports more than 10% each. And together they add up to more than 40%, 42% or so. So these are the three majors who really decide on how trade rules go forward. Now, what is India's response to all this? That is what we should be discussing now. Now, India's share in world exports today is only 1.8%. And our share in world imports is only 2.8%. So you can imagine that we have a long way to go if we have to become a major economy. And as of now, our heft in terms of influencing trade rules is somewhat limited. So we have to find partners with whom we can move further with this. And we also, I said earlier, have a large goods imbalance. And if we have to become the third largest world economy and do better, then really things have to change enormously on this front. More importantly, we also have a huge trade imbalance with China. In fact, imports from China today are 8 times our exports to China. So that, and the trade has exceeded US dollars 100 billion. And unfortunately, China accepts import of primary goods from India, intermediate goods maybe, finished goods rarely. Why? So our exports to China last year, for example, was about 15-16 billion. But our imports from China, more than 100. So this is a gap and dependence that we need to address. And 5 years ago, April 2020, I'm sure many of you remember, there was on the one hand COVID-19 and all the vulnerabilities that it brought. And on the other, there was movement of troops to the northern borders from our northern neighbor. This was a moment of very grim awakening for India. And the Galwan clash also reminded us where we should be giving focus. As a result, I would think the government has reformulated our approach towards over-dependence and concentration, particularly in some critical products which needed de-risking. Now, what has evolved since then, I would say the third point, a kind of 4-point approach that we have put together. First is keep out risk-ridden investments, technologies and apps. We haven't mentioned China specifically, but that is what is happening. Second, strengthen indigenous manufacturing and competitiveness through production-linked incentive schemes and other approaches. And we are now going ahead with a national mission on semiconductors, critical minerals, We also need to step up in other areas like bulk drugs, APIs, medical devices, etc., where we should not be really dependent on other countries so much. The other aspect is to forge supply chain collaborations with trusted partners, with friendly partners. Here again, we have come to several agreements that we have signed with someone like Japan, for example, Australia, for example. So these are countries with which we need to pursue this further. And fourthly, we are also expanding our FTA portfolio, free trade agreements. So we are in negotiations with the European Union now. We have also signed recently with the UK. You may have seen details about it. Last year we signed with EFTA countries, and UAE, Australia, etc. have been other examples. But we are negotiating with many more countries. And all this is work in progress. And you also must have seen our Prime Minister Modi emphasizing these aspects in the Independence Day address that he gave on 15th August. Now, we are also reviewing the India-ASEAN FTA, and if all this can be done, it will be a big thing. But all said and done, US remains our largest export partner. We are number one destination for our exports to the United States, as of today, both on services and in goods. So, notwithstanding all the Trump tantrums, if we can somehow come to a conclusion on the bilateral trade agreement with the United States, I think it will be a good idea. Our government is trying to see how this can be done without making any commitments which will hurt us in the agricultural area or other areas. We will have to wait and see how this plays out. So, with so many aspects outlined, let me try and conclude. So what we have seen so far is the world shifting from comparative advantage, theory of comparative advantage, as a basis to one of the big trading powers leveraging their strengths. More on the lines of might is right and drifting away from WTO rules. In this scenario, we have to remain calm, but all the while focusing on building our own capacity and competitiveness. There is much we can do in terms of economic reform, reduce cost of doing business, improve ease of doing business, etc. All the while strengthening our infrastructure. And we have to be able to see if we can grow at 8% plus. This is very, very important. Second, it is key to enhance manufacturing, to move towards the 20% plus share. We need to particularly focus on strategically important areas like steel, aluminium, copper, critical minerals, to semiconductors, medical devices and plastics. This is again key. And of course, we should do this keeping our quality and competitiveness in mind. In fact, I was very happy to see the railway minister, Ashwini Vaishnav, emphasizing a few days back that he will be ruthless in terms of mediocrity, in terms of railway component supply. And that applies across the board to all products. You are all future technocrats, and you will have a very, very important role in making India a manufacturing power. And I hope so. Third, we need to create an ecosystem where innovation and technology and development thrive, creating world-class institutions and universities. While we have made significant advances in this regard, including this IIT itself is an example of that, we have a lot to catch up on making new inventions and technology and securing more patents. Here again, all of you have a role. Only then Viksit Bharat will emerge. Now let's look upon the new restrictions that US has placed on H-1B visas as an opportunity to retain and develop local talent, strengthen technology development, and wealth creation right in India. There is no reason why we cannot do this by creating a better reward and recognition system apart from much else. So, in short, what I'm saying is our demographic dividend should not be only on paper. It should be made to work for us with upskilling, updating, etc. where needed. So while our trade negotiators, I'm sure, will try to limit the damage from ongoing chaos in the trading system, we should use this opportunity to enhance our own domestic capacities and capabilities. It can be done, and I'm sure all of you, and with that you on the future of India, can immensely contribute. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your thought-provoking and really insightful address. Your words have given us much to reflect upon. We open now for the audience session, like the interaction session. I invite the audience to share their questions and observations with Dr. Sheshan.
Please, I hope you don't mind me coming there because my hearing is not great.
My name is Gopinath and I have a couple of questions. Who might able to tie or control Trump? That's first question. Second is, how come China is able to pump so much amount of subsidy for a couple of decades or maybe even more actually? Whether India will able to do the similar thing to enhance manufacturing? Because manufacturing, enhanced manufacturing is the only key. Can we do a similar way like China? Is it possible?
On the first question, I'm not sure who can control Trump. Trump understands leverage. In fact, if you show yourself as weak, you are in control. And the only country now which has been able to come up with some, you can say, showing in where is China. Tomorrow, the two leaders are going to meet, as you know. And China has raised the stakes. It has put the beginning of this month, on 9th of October, it has introduced VP controls on export of critical minerals, technologies, and a whole lot of related. It has also said not only control on export from China, the moment, but if any export from anywhere in the world contains even 0.1% of critical minerals or rare earths whose origin is China, then they have to take a license from China. Otherwise, there will be repercussions. This is sweet. So indirectly, China is not only targeting US, but also India, but also because even if we, Indian company, wants to export something which has some Chinese rare magnet or other item in it, we have to take the license. Now, why have they done this? They felt that US was suppressing China's development in terms of putting restrictions on advanced technology chips exports and chip making equipment from the West to China. So this is China. Trump has come back. They are negotiating. We will wait and see what happens. Unfortunately, we have to admit we don't have the cards. Simply friendship, all that doesn't strike anything with Trump. In fact, if he can deal with his European allies the way he has done, you know where we stand. So we have to wait and see if we can negotiate in a manner that meets some of his demands, but not in the cost of our country's future state. Our negotiators will do, we will have to wait. I am hopeful this can be done because you can well argue that it is in US's own interest to have a good deal. If there is any market which is going to grow in the years to come in the world, in the scale it is India. No other. And it is in US's interest to have a good relationship with a growing market. So that is the answer I can give you. On your second question, China has given subsidies, China has done all this. Can we do something similar? No, we can't. For the simple reason that China is a state-controlled economy. I think, I don't know if there are any economists in this room or people who have studied economics. But basically, a country has savings and consumption. Now, as a country grows, the consumption rises, wage levels increase in proportion to your level of prosperity. But in the case of China, the level of consumption is still very low, about 35-40%, whereas the savings is much higher. So artificially, the country has been able to keep the wage suppression related to the level of prosperity. No doubt wages are increasing. But if China were a were a free market economy, the demand for increase in wages would have been far higher, and we could have had to concede. And they would not have been able to save so much. And those savings go into all these activities, including BRI and all that. So, we are coming back to the same issue. Here is a non-market economy which has entered into the WTO and in a way wrecking the WTO, because this, what you see now is the reaction of the West to what China has done all these years. And it has come to a very commanding position. So we will have to wait and see how this can be dealt with. Ideally, the West should collaborate with the rest. Biden tried to do this to some extent, but Trump is going in a different direction. Whether that will work, we will have to wait and see.
Myself, Hari Krishna. I have a question. So, globally, dollar has a huge dominance.
Pardon?
US dollar has a huge dominance. So what do you think about the impact of Indian economy if India could stand like what China did, like bringing a global payment system, trade agreements in yuan, like China just recently brought, like they have agreements with 40 countries. What if India also joined hands with the BRICS to bring up something like that for de-dollarization? Like, what do you think, how it will impact?
Look, our relationship with China is somewhat different from other countries' relationships with China. We have had one conflict, 62, and we have had the Bengal experience. And China views India as a potential competitor. It does not view any other country in the same level of competition, potential competition as it is. So we are a big economy, and we have talent, and we have shown some successes in certain areas. So in due course of time, if there is any country which can challenge China, it may be India. And it wants to keep that in control. It is using Pakistan to create problems for us. It is using some of our other neighbors to create problems for us. So you know what that country is up to. So to what extent you can trust the country with a longer term arrangement, I leave that to you. But that notwithstanding, I would certainly agree with you if you are suggesting that over the short term, we have no choice. Either in terms of antibiotics, or in terms of lithium batteries, or in terms of critical minerals processing. I think we have to come to some agreements in these areas, see how far it can go. But our manufacturing has to be. So we really have a lot to do there. It has to be on a mission mode, as it were, to be able to be in that country. It does not have so friendly intentions to it. It's a challenge. On the currency issue, at the moment, I think we are also not keen to provoke Trump. Because we are on a delicate mission on the trade side. We have to see if we can work something out of the trade deal. So I don't think it will be in our interest to go on that front at the moment. Although, as a large country, at some point of time, this issue will certainly come up. And we have to take a decision accordingly at that time. But now may not be the time. Please. No other than me.
Okay, as you mentioned the challenges and the opportunity, I want to mention some things like what challenges we have with every opportunity you mentioned. So for economic growth, you're talking about the 8% plus GDP growth. Why do you always talk about the growth, like third economy in the world? If you look at the per capita income, they're very far away from the Vietnam also. Like. So we're not focusing on the per capita income rather than showing the growth only, number one. Number two, talk about the energy security. There is a crude oil prices rises in the world, and as US always string the restriction import also. Like we have currency swap with Iran, but we are not able to now import from Iran also, Venezuela, all the things. Number two. Number three, figuring making India, stand up India, startup India. These are the failures. Like the data said they are not as we're expecting. Like. Third, H1B visa, you say you cannot able the opportunity, but there is no reward to coming back to India. Rather, these people choosing Germany and other Scandinavian countries to go. There is no return back. Right? There is no reward for them to come back. There is no infrastructure. There is no strategy to invite these people back. Number four. And last thing we're talking about the creating the universities and world-class institutions. Rather, we are inviting foreign universities to come here and open the campuses here. So by looking at all the umbrella scenario from upside, do you think we have that capacity, that infrastructure to deal with such a, what did I say, multiple problems to deal with?
I think we have, but we have to meet those challenges. The whole idea of this lecture was to evoke or provoke people like you who are the future of India. You can do it if you put your mind and heart to it. Not singly, I'm sure, but collectively. We have no choice. We have done it in quite a few areas. Milk production, we are the largest in the world. We came up with some ideas. We have our own model, as it were. Because India cannot replicate the China. Forget about it. That is, no Indian would like his freedom to be done. So there are issues there. But there are areas where you have succeeded. IT services, for example. You're good. And I'm sure AI is an area which you can use to advantage.
In that sense, sir, we don't have AI model in India, right? AI is a future. China have, even we don't have policy of AI, right? We just have some frameworks and meetings happening there. We don't have a chief also, like, so in that sense, I
when you say we don't have, you expect others to create.
We are lagging behind the race, like they are far away, far forward from us, like we're lagging behind in that sense. So that's the question. Do we have infrastructure to do that things like?
It will come. If you see the infrastructure that I grew up in, and the infrastructure that we have today makes a difference. If you go to Mumbai, I have been to Mumbai several times. Today the scene has made a difference. People have a different perspective. Earlier, from Nariman point to the airport, you had to keep aside 2.5 hours. Today, they will do it in 1.5 hours. It is the same mindset some people have, but we can't do it. But you create a solution. And then say, yeah, we could have done this 20 years earlier. Why did we do it then? So, the answer then is, can we think of something which will help us in the future? Look, China. It has taken rare and critical. 20 years ago, it was nowhere. But collectively, they decided this was an area they would come up. And now they are making Trump run around them. Using that as a leverage. So this is very, very good. This whole trade scenario lesson brings us to the point, unless you have leverage, you have strength, others will take you for a ride. However much friendship they may espouse when they talk to you, but you need leverage. And this is something we as Indians should be focused on. Whether we will do it, you have to give me the answer. And on oil, yes, that is certainly an issue where each country takes a decision. Because US also has a national interest. Earlier, it was not a crude producer on that level, LNG producer on that level. Today it is. But sooner or later, if it is going to intervene in the market in this way, it may not be comfortable with what will happen. There will be repercussions. Because some of the Gulf countries are already not very happy with what's going on. Because what US is getting, I said all the purchases, commitments that US is getting from other countries, is for purchasing from the US. they purchase from the US. What about these other countries who are also sellers of food? So that balance is getting upset. So we have to wait and see. At some stage, I guess, because I emphasized the 1930s, all these rules of GATT arose because of the tariff wars, currency wars, which went to the World War II.
Even to that question also, like as you mentioned, as you know, national interests drive the international system. Like there is anarchy in the international system, but these days, what you look at, like, can we going back toward the deglobalizing world or a pre-LPG world where a dictators dictate the world order? There is a anarchy in the world system. So in that sense, do you think like we are going back in the history? We're not going progressively.
History has a tendency to repeat itself. And sooner or later, countries will realize that maybe that's not in their best interest to, because trade flourishes when there is stability, predictability. Otherwise, trade will not, because the exporter does not know what tariff his export will suffer from at the other end. He will not export. So these are things we have to wait and see. Anybody else? Please.
When we look to this global world order from a big country like India, when we look to the current world order from a big country like India, we at least have this
leverage to speak about, right? But what do smaller countries think these times? Like, how do they think of surviving?
No, in fact, it's a very good question. And you can see how these ASEAN countries, for example, Malaysia, Indonesia, etc., they are behaving. When Trump had discussions with them, they are almost slavish. I mean, they're kind of and flattering and all that. Even Japan, Korea, we can see what's going on. At the same time, they will do likewise in China. They are ready. Not trying to offer either part. How long it is getting on? You have to wait and see. So here you have ASEAN countries signing free trade and trade agreement with US. If you look at the text, they promise quite a few things. But if, at the same time, 2 days ago, ASEAN and China signed a 3.0 FTA. I don't know if you have seen. What's happening? So, a country like India will think twice before signing on to something which is legally inconsistent. But certain other countries do not. Even China, they signed a deal with Trump in 2020 that they will purchase $200 billion of agricultural products from US. And US will reduce the duties. The deal was never implemented. So, we have to wait and see how things go forward. Hedging is the best bet at the moment. But hedging can go the start and not take it further away. Smaller countries, maybe people will not even mind. But big country like India, no. So you have to be a little more careful in terms of what you do. With countries like this. But I think that is why our deal is taking more time. Because I think our delegation is working on the written, Trump just makes announcements. And then written order follows later, and there are a lot of disputes. In fact, what US announced about South Korea, we are still discussing. I don't know today was to, they were to sign something. Whether they have signed, I don't know. But that's the way it is. We cannot allow. Our parliament will not allow. And there will be questions. So our delegation is very keen to write it down, details of what would be the deal, and that is taking more time.
But unlike the Cold War time, where the smaller countries tended to be either aligned to the US or to the USSR, now it seems like almost every small country is putting their feet on both, is it? Or do you see a block kind of clustering?
Yeah, but Cold War was less on economics, more on strategic issues, political issues. And at the time of Cold War, China was not such a big part. It was basically Russia. And Russia is not a big country on trade. Basically, it has some resources, crude and so on. But it is not a big trade. And at that time, in any case, Russia and China were not part of that. In fact, Russia and China did not join GATT because they said these were capitalist institutions. China joined in 2001, Russia in 2007. And the expectation was that they will adopt market economy, but that is not happening. Of course, China even today will claim that it is a market economy, but everybody knows that behind that there is a whole lot of non-market economy practices.
Any more questions? Okay, thank you so much, sir, for your gracious and insightful response. I would request Dr. Deepak Rajendra, Dean students, to kindly present a memento to Dr. V.S. Sheshadri as a token of heartfelt gratitude and appreciation for his time and wisdom. Thank you, sir. I extend our sincere thanks to Dr. V.S. Sheshadri, sir, for sharing his knowledge and vision with us, and also Dr. Deepak, sir, for his support and encouragement, and also heartfelt thanks to EML team for their dedication and smooth coordination behind the scenes. Once again, thank you so much. Refreshments are available outside the classroom. Please have them.